right. Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. Really excited to be doing this webinar, this panel focused on the food and beverage industry in Oregon, and very pleased that we've had a great response, a lot of folks joining, and even more pleased to be spending time with this great group of industry leaders and good friends this afternoon. And so Sam Tannehill and I will be your co-moderators for this afternoon session. And Sam's going to introduce our panelists. But just as we get started here, I thought I'd share a few thoughts to kind of get us going. And also I want to invite people. We're going to have the live Q&A chat available. So if you know how to do that and you want to get a question in, please do, and we'll try to pull those. I know there's a lot of great conversation that we're going to have here, and it would be nice to stuff from those of you that have tuned in. So, I'll just say, I had the pleasure of working with Sam in 2016. We co-chaired an effort that involved industry leaders, business associations, and a couple of government agencies to take a look at the impact and opportunity for the food and beverage industry in Oregon. And I know we both and many others share the belief that there's a great opportunity for us to continue to develop this industry in a broad, inclusive, economically beneficial and socially beneficial way in this state. And that one of the things that we led this effort to take a look at the industry and identified 5 specific actions that we thought made sense to take forward in a coordinated effort. Everything ranging from investment in R&D to making it easier to navigate the services and business environment in the state, to a coordinated effort to develop markets. And I think there was a lot of enthusiasm, the opportunities that we saw and the impact that we saw as possible. And frankly, I wish that had moved forward more since then. But I do think that what we learned in that study and what we've continued to see since is just this broad opportunity to bring this industry together. And so we're hoping that this panel and subsequent action that can come out of this might kind of re-energize that opportunity there and that coordinated effort to build our industry and create opportunity for large and small businesses across the state of various varieties in the food and beverage industry. So with that, with those thoughts, I'll pass it off to Sam to introduce our panel and to get us going on the conversation.
Thanks, Patrick. We just got some numbers. The Oregon Business Plan got some numbers from ECA Northwest, and I was surprised. I think there's a feeling sometimes in Oregon that the food and beverage cluster is nice to have, but it's not necessary to the state. It's not a large economic driver, doesn't make a lot of impact. But looking at these numbers, it's pretty amazing. From 2007 to 2019, as far as total employment, the food and beverage cluster only lagged behind tourism and business services, which is pretty amazing. And then taking a peek at the 10-year growth pattern for the next 10 years, we're going to grow, or they project the growth of the food and beverage cluster to grow 14.5%, which is second only to business services. So more than high tech, more than tourism, more than outdoor gear and apparel. And so I think that we're sitting on a huge gold mine here. The issues that we have, I believe there's external issues facing us, and there's also internal issues where we need to do better as well. And the panelists today are going to address some of those subjects. I think we need to talk about, we lag behind national food and beverage salaries. So how do we increase folks' salary? We obviously, as you mentioned, Patrick, have a lot of challenges external with regulations and new laws that are coming into the industry that could be hampering our growth. We have, some acute external challenges with COVID. We're also seeing, I think, internally as well, is how do we nurture a more inclusive industry, both economically and ethnically as well. Those are some big challenges that we need to face, and I'm looking forward to hearing what our panel has to say. So we're going to go through some brief introductions and then launch some questions. The first person I'm going to ask to introduce herself is Carla Chambers. Carla, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Carla Chambers. My husband and I founded Stallbush Island Farms in 1985. Today we have 4 of our adult children and 2 of their spouses involved in the operation. We started in 1985 with 2 employees and today have over 400. So by any definition, we are a startup and entrepreneurial organization. Bill and I are both 4th and 5th generation Oregonians, family business, but we started, our own business 35 years ago. We're a vertically integrated farming and food processing company. We've exported to 30 countries plus. We are in retail with a Stallbush and Farmers Market label, and also an ingredient supplier to other food companies. We were the first farm in the United States to be certified as sustainable, and with a real strong presence in certified organic as well. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel and to be with some other industry leaders today. And clearly I see the competitive advantages and opportunities in Oregon. And I think it's a great discussion for us to have.
Thanks, Carla. I've got to say it's a pleasure having you on this panel as well. Next up, we're going to go for Kim Malik. Kim?
Hi, I'm Kim Malik. I founded Salt and Straw Ice Cream 10 years ago with my cousins. So we're also a family founded business. We now have 21 locations up and down the West Coast, from San Diego up to Seattle, and including a store in downtown Disneyland, which hopefully Disneyland will open again someday and we'll all be back to the happiest place on earth. We're about to, early next year, expand to the East Coast with a handful of locations in Florida. So we're really feeling fortunate to be in a position where we're growing again, coming in, out of this first phase of the pandemic that we've been going through. I don't take that for granted. We've worked really hard to get here, and we've been through some pretty challenging times, over the past 6 months, to put it lightly. We closed all of our stores and laid off most of our team members, and had to sort of restructure and regroup to come back. We've hired now nearly 500 people post-pandemic. And we're excited to head into growth mode again, and we don't take that lightly. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation to talk about what it takes to really invest in this part of our economy and in this business and in this industry, because I think it's a meaningful part of our culture in Portland and in Oregon, and obviously, as you said, a meaningful part of our economy as well. And I think the future could be really bright, and it's going to be an important component in the next chapter of what the United States, quite frankly, is going to be going through. So I think Oregon could be really central to that, and I'm glad we're here together to talk about it.
Thanks, Kim. It's good to have you on. I'm interested in exploring, as we move forward today, a little bit on how we make that move from Main Street to traded sector, and how we can accelerate some of those transactions here in Oregon, which are really important. We're next going to go to Jess Lyon. Jess?
Hi, good afternoon. Jess Lyon. I'm a partner at the Davis Ray Tremaine law firm in Portland, where about 20 years ago, I founded our food and beverage and agriculture practice. I grew up on a small farm in Eastern Washington and studied and worked in food and agriculture before I became a lawyer. And back when everybody else wanted to do tech and .com and telecom, I decided I wanted to build my practice around what I knew and loved, which was the food industry. So I did that and was able to kind of get on the ground floor with a great opportunity of clients who were excited and growing kind of when there was less space in the sector. But as I matured in my career, I realized that one of the things that we could really do as service providers was build a valuable cohort and network amongst professional service providers who are truly outstanding, top of market at what they did, but beyond that were authentically committed to serving clients across the food and beverage space. And then as part of that, a few years ago, created a proprietary event of our firm called Farm to Label, where we bring executives together, fast-paced, respect the time, and to really share ideas and best practices. And it's largely attendees from Oregon. About half are from Oregon. About half the attendees fly in from out of market. But we'd recognize that executives, when you are at trade shows and events, spend so much time either selling or being sold to, or having, you know, engineers and buyers on the trade show floor. There's really no time to free yourself for some really best practice business and operational issues and think strategies just a little bit. So we've tried to create that space and had a good time doing this in this every other year event.
Thanks, Jess. I was reflecting a little bit before this panel on how long we've known each other. And, you know, the growth at DWT in the food sector has been amazing, you know, sort of paralleling the Oregon wine industry as well. But it's something that we're going to touch on too is, you know, how can we stay connected in the face of this growth, and how do we mentor and bring more people in the cluster and make sure that web is really tight. I think, you know, all of us on this call know each other, at least the faces I'm seeing here. We're either old friends or new friends, or have a lot of people in common. And for being such a tight industry, Patrick and I were discussing, sometimes it's hard to get together. We need to figure out ways to do that. So David, I'm going to have you clean up here and go on with the introduction.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, everyone, for having me. It's great to be part of this awesome panel. I am the CEO and founder of the Merriweather Group. We are focused on working with entrepreneurs, helping them on their journey. Food and beverage is a big part of our practice. We offer kind of a business acceleration support, as well as M&A, investment banking advisory. My wife and I started Oregon Chai, a tea beverage brand. So like several of us on this panel, a family business. So learned a lot about how to build a company that was really focused on delivering an experience and not just a product. And having that experience be one that's authentic and that offers the consumer a way to aspire to do something that's transformative for them. Our tagline was Nirvana in a cup. And Heather, early on, when we were a tiny business in our rented house, said, if we can help our consumer to feel like she's been transported to the Himalayas for 3 or 4 seconds when she tips a cup of Oregon Chai to her mouth, then we've done our job. And so we try to work with brands to create and help them to create that experience with their consumers, and have had blessed to work with some of the best here in town: Dave's Killer Breads, Voodoo Donuts, Alpenrose Dairy, Stumptown Coffee, and several others. So it's an honor to be part of this.
Thanks, David. Patrick, you know what I realized is we didn't introduce ourselves. So maybe we should take a moment and do a brief introduction of each other. Well, you do yours and I'll do mine.
Okay. Well, thanks, Sam. I'm Patrick Kreitzer, President and CEO of the Tillamook County Creamery Association. Been in Oregon for a long, well, I was born here and my family's been here for a long time. I'm very pleased to be leading an agriculturally and focused and food focused business, and have worked in food and other industries throughout my career, and very pleased to be part of this effort to you know, ensure the continued success of our industry in the state.
Thanks, Ian. My name again is Sam Tannehill. My wife Cheryl Francis and I and another couple, Bill and Deb Hatcher, started A to Z Wineworks in 2002, and quickly grew it to one of Oregon's largest wineries and one of the nation's largest independently owned wineries. And I've been here in Oregon since '95 and enjoyed every single minute of it. Well, I shouldn't say enjoyed every single minute of it, but mostly every single minute of it. And certainly enjoy being part of this vibrant food and beverage community. We've got an amazing asset here that happens also to be a lot of fun. So let's get exploring. Patrick, do you got a question for us?
Yeah, so I think what we'll do here is Sam and I will ask questions of our panelists and to keep the conversation going. But please, I mean, we've got so many brilliant minds here on this panel. So if you have, if there are things you want to jump in reaction to what each other say, please do that. And we'll manage it together. So, you know, I thought I might start with Jess. You know, Jess, you talked about the Farm to Label program, which is a fantastic program, one of the unique opportunities for our industry to come together. You saw an opportunity for that. And I also know that you're you lead your firm's national practice in food and beverage and agriculture. And so I'm wondering what you see as an opportunity to continue, accelerate, build upon that concept of us coming together, what you see nationally happening that we might learn from, and kind of where you'd like to even take the farm to label or other programs that might bring us all together in new ways.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I guess first, kind of where I see Portland on the Portland and Oregon, I should say, the whole state of Oregon, sitting on the national stage. Certainly people admire us. They know there's lots of innovation here, exciting things happening on the brand sense. And then there's certainly some kind of hidden gems, I think, frankly, that investors and strategic partners around the country are learning to appreciate. I think as an industry, we maybe have lacked some of the tools and resources that we can talk about a little bit later that waves a flag maybe as proudly as, say, Boulder or Austin and places like that. But we certainly have the opportunity. And that's one of the things that I try to do by leaving Farm to Label in Portland, is to bring in some of those other both allied industry members from other markets, as well as investors and advisors, to come to Portland to get a chance to put their feet on the ground and experience sort of what our companies here have to offer. And so it tries to be a little bit of a showcase event at the same time as we get the leaders together to show the strength of what you all deliver every day for your organizations.
Thank you. Jess, you had mentioned Portland as kind of the sort of, kind of de facto economic center of the state, but obviously this state, one of the values of the state is our strong agricultural diversity and the broad diversity of business opportunity throughout the state. And Carla, I thought, thought you might have some interesting reflections on, as you talk, incredibly successful startup that you and your husband have led, and now is a family business that's doing very well. What are some of the challenges and opportunities associated with being sort of out of the major metropolitan area from a connection, service provider, or whatever other challenges or opportunities you think exist for due to your geographic location and agricultural focus?
Yeah, I might start and come back to the asset base that we've talked a little bit about. I mean, if we were sitting in Nebraska having this panel discussion, we'd be talking about the big 7 agricultural commodities in the Midwest. And I think what I'd want to be sure, everyone listening and participating today, is that they just recognize how unbelievably rich our assets are here in Oregon and how unbelievably unique they are. We grow over 250 agricultural crops here in the Willamette Valley alone. And that is just one of the most special, diversified, micro-agricultural climates of anywhere in the world. The only place in the world that competes with us on wheat yields, for instance, is in Cambridge, north of Cambridge, and in Europe. And so we have tremendous soils, tremendous natural resource capacity. And I think anytime you look at your competitive advantage, you say, okay, what is that natural resource asset that's available to you? When Bill and I started in 1990 and we built our first processing line, 19 food processors went out of business. And I said, wow, Bill, not a great time for food processing, but we were diversifying into much more of niche markets. And I think one of the real strategic discussions here, and I'm an agricultural economist, so I think about, okay, where is your competitive advantage as a region? And our competitive advantage is that tremendous strength in our natural resource base. It was very large food processors, that went out, but it was niche players that came in. And, we've lost 2 of our largest processors, Norpac and AgriPac. I do see an opportunity with the land base, the natural resource richness, to rebuild more of those niche players.
Hey, Kim. I've got a question for you. You know, we're seeing a lot of questions roll in, which is great. And I wish we had, you know, hours to discuss this, and I wish we could do it in person. But I know that you were focused at, you know, having lots of mentorships at Salt and Straw, and that's something that you care deeply about. How do we continue that within this cluster, especially in light of COVID and Zoom calls? And also, how do we bring, I think, something that's really important for our industry is talking about more equity and ethnic equity as we move forward. It's tough in Oregon, number one, and it's tough in the food and beverage industry. So I'm just interested about your thoughts there.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the mentorship side, you know, for us, it was we think of that in a lot of different ways. One of the things that pops into my head when you ask that question was our journey when we decided to grow the company. And, you know, we had about 3 years under our belt here in Portland, and we had established our brand based on really a lot of deep partnerships and collaborations here in Portland that made up our whole menu, from Rogue Creamery to you know, local farmers to Olympia Provisions, local brewers, on and on and on. So when we decided to open in a new city, instead of just exporting our ice cream, we decided to partner with more local artisans in each city where we did business. And what we found over the past 10 years is that it allows us to work with hundreds and hundreds of small artisans and entrepreneurs. And we work with them about a year out before the product is going to come to market. And we start to partner with them on food safety, being able to prepare the inventory that they need, helping with marketing so that we're ready a year later to launch the flavor on our menu together. It's a really deep collaborative process. So that's been, I think, and during this COVID time, as we've come back, we've been in touch with many of our, you know, partners and collaborators who are really struggling to make it, you know, and as we're coming back online and we're able to start purchasing from them again, there's this ripple effect in the economy. And so it's very meaningful. We're oftentimes like their largest, you know, their largest check that they get is from our company, which isn't that big. So it's really meaningful to be able to have that effect and to have that long-term relationship. And, you know, when we thought of that in terms of diversity inclusion, you know, over the years, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, we started working with a few different organizations really intentionally in every city that we were in, who had incubator programs that were making sure that, you know, first generation immigrants were having a chance to launch their business and getting support services that they needed to do that. So we entered into partnerships with them. And so not only were we engaging with them on all of this work in terms of helping getting their business off the ground, but it's been an ongoing year after year relationship from a financial perspective as well. So that's one form of mentorship. We also, you know, are involved in a few different programs with the Oregon Women's Prison, the United Way. You know, we hire hundreds and hundreds of people. And so we work with folks, you know, year after year to put together really specific training programs in place so that we can give folks opportunities to have a career in the hospitality and food and beverage industry. So we think of it from a few different angles.
Hey, Sam, if I can put in a plug for food companies out there that looking for ways to be more purposeful about this. Our food and beverage group at Davis Wright Germain just joined a program called, the abbreviation is JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, it's put on by some folks in the natural products industry, and we're piloting programs basically to help our organizations be more purposeful for that. It's the JEDI Collaborative. From OSC, which stands for the One Step Closer Natural Products Industry Collaborative. For anybody
That's
else.
great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, that sounds like really. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just going to say other panelists should jump in. You know, we don't have to have a strict question and answer. Let's make this conversation as well.
So I'll jump in. This is David Howitt. You know, obviously critically important question and issues. And, you know, one example that I think is a really good one is, so Dave's Killer Breads, a local Portland brand. I think, and Jess might know this, over 40% of their overall workforce are people who have been incarcerated. And often when a company grows from a founder-owned business, it can sort of lose some of its way in terms of some of those founding, critically important elements of the brand's DNA that actually made the brand special. But in the case of Dave's, and increasingly, I think with our Oregon companies, those special qualities actually get built upon. So I think we all know on this group, and our attendees probably know that, you know, Dave's brought in private equity and then ultimately was sold, but they've kept that critical element of their brand in place. And so they're still incredibly active in hiring ex-convicts, people that would otherwise have a difficult time finding work. And they're hired throughout the organization, not just sort of warehouse jobs. They also have built a foundation that's actively involved in working with people when they're incarcerated, so that they have the skills once they come out to be productive in a world that changes in days and weeks, not years, in terms of technology and the like, and where they can often get left behind. So I think there are different ways that we can look at this issue of inclusiveness and diversity. And some of it is clearly supporting the entrepreneurs that are starting these companies. And some of it is supporting the ways that companies who may be started by people who are not diverse are working to increase diversity in the community through their actions, Dave's being an example of that.
Yeah, that's a great one, David. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
I might jump in on that question as well. I think that anytime a company, you know, in our particular case, we've had, when you have women in ownership from early on and you have diversity at the top from early on, it really sets the pattern for, I think Dave's Killer Bread is a great example of that. I think at Stahlbusch, we had both of those things from day one. Over 50% of our senior managers were women throughout the history of building this company. And as I look at the diversity in our company today, I'm really proud of it. We're close to Oregon State University, so it's easy for us to pull in, you know, students and people from, you know, literally around the world that have the opportunity to be here. But also having a very diverse customer base, I think, keeps us all on our toes. And how do we keep our umbrella really wide open and continue learning, you know, every day? And so I think continuing to look at what's at the top of our companies is a really important, and on our boards is a really important piece to, we're setting that message from the top down.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Carla. And you know, I applaud the comments and the work that each of you is doing in this space. I know we've all talked about an interest in broadening access support for a more inclusive and diverse industry, and you know, acknowledging that, you know, everyone on this panel is white. You know, that right there, hopefully over time will change, and we'll see a more diverse group of industry leaders in this state. I know we all share that objective. And one critical element of it is access. You know, and Kim, you talked about mentorship. Carla, you talked about leadership at the top. David, you talked about company objectives, and Jess, you know, and staying true to the purpose. And Jess, you talked about, you know, an important industry, intentional industry initiative around this, and that's all fantastic. One of the elements of access is, you know, getting that early access to retail for products that need to be on the retail shelf. And you know, Carla and Kim, you know, you both have driven, and David, in your previous endeavors, have driven this early, you know, kind of development to scaling. And so, and I know Jess and David, you also work with companies that do that. So Carla, maybe you can, just as a follow-up, maybe talk about what's that like, you know, that first access to markets, and you know, how that breakthrough happens. I know there's a lot of folks that are listening in today that are, you know, trying to get that first distribution break or scale from just a small distribution to something larger. And, you know, how do we create more access there, do you think?
Yep. I think that's a really good question. And I think it's access to capital, but it's also access to markets. And I'll come back to the capital in a minute. You know, Bill and I, when we started our label, Stahlbusch Island Farms, the brown craft package and the frozen fruits and vegetables, We couldn't compete against the big national brands, and they were here in our everyday markets, the Safeways, the Albertsons, mainstream markets, and we weren't big enough to compete. We didn't have a competitive advantage in terms of a cost structure. We weren't the low cost producer, and our biggest competitor on the certified organic front was Cascadian Farms, owned by General Mills. Our biggest competitor on the certified organic pumpkin front was, Libby's, owned by Nestle, the biggest food company in the world. So we had to be pretty astute marketers to create that niche. And, I spent 35 years of my career going to natural food shows, going to Expo West when there were, 4,000 people at that show, and now 90,000 people walk that show a day. But I think it takes time, and you've got to get out there. People have to know what's special about your product. They have to know, what your brand promise is. And, we just spent 35 years going to food shows and introducing ourselves to buyers. 2 years ago, we put the first art on our labels of any fruit and vegetable package in the freezer section. And it's how do you really communicate that quality and that brand promise? And for us, it was just meeting those natural food buyers nationwide and in Canada. We couldn't go region by region because those regions were, those big markets. We had to get into those niche markets. And it just takes time. I think in our case, the access to capital early on, how agricultural property trades is highly unique. And Bill and I were 24 and 25 years old. We borrowed $1.1 million, which I will never forget that day as long as I live. But we borrowed it from the farmer who owned this farm. And we had 7 years to prove ourselves with a balloon payment so that we could walk into a bank and have them finance us. Well, bank's not going to talk to a 24 and 25-year-old. So the pressure was really on early on to prove ourselves. I was on the faculty at Oregon State. We didn't take a dollar out of the business for 7 years. I think access to capital is one thing. But you just have to prove yourself so hard and so quick and so early. And the barriers to entry, Patrick, on the food safety, the food, some of the things, it'd be hard for us to start our own business today. And, we'll get to that list a little later in the panel, but yeah, it's capital and markets. And it's hard in agriculture to get that foot in the door.
Absolutely is, yeah.
I think we all of us that have founded businesses remember the day that we didn't have to we could take our personal guarantee off the loans. That was a pretty amazing day. Yeah. So maybe following up David real quickly, or Jess or Kim, in light of what Carla was saying, maybe where could the state help us a little bit more, and where is the state putting up roadblocks perhaps to getting that capital, to access to capital, to growing, to having a lot of our companies take that next step?
I'll jump in and say a few things and try to address the issue of the state, but capital generally. Our experience over the last 20 years is it's sort of the tale of two cities as it relates to money. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times, depending on where you are in your business cycle. Once you're profitable, which is, an interesting word for those of us who have started businesses, there's lots and lots of money available. I mean, private equity has more money now than they ever have. And they're, hurting in an effort to try to put it to work. And they're wanting to write bigger checks, and they're willing to do things they've never done before to place that money. But until you've reached that place where you can access private equity, it's really tough in Oregon, really, really tough. And, something I'll say, which is, probably offensive to some, is our successful entrepreneurs in our community have not done what other successful entrepreneurs in other communities have done. So whether you're in Boston and it's the Reebok family, or you're in Seattle and it's folks who have come out of Microsoft or Amazon, we don't have a lot of active investors from our big wins, from our big companies. You don't see a lot of the Nike executives forming venture funds or angel funds. You don't see that with Columbia. You don't see it with Bob's Red Mill. You don't see it with others. And I think that's something we need to talk about. There is this pay it forward sort of element where if you've done it and you've done it here with our resources in our great state, I think there's somewhat of an obligation to look at taking some of the wealth that you've amassed and generated and look to make investments. I'm not talking about donations, but investments in the next generation of entrepreneurs in our community. And I don't see that happening. So we have a super small angel community, and they're active and they make an effort, but it's relatively small. And so if you're an early stage company that has not reached that place where you can access professional capital, you're herding cats in this town, and you are scrapping to find equity money and or lending dollars. So now on the state. So the state of Oregon, my understanding is, there are a couple different funds that have been created. One, I think from lottery dollars, that are earmarked to be invested in entrepreneurial businesses. And that's great. And I think they're actually relatively substantial dollar amounts. Where I think there's a challenge is those dollars have been placed with venture and private equity groups that are out of state. And those groups are told, well, you're running Oregon money, try to find Oregon deals to put that money to work in. But they're not here. They might have one person that they refer to as an operating partner that lives here, but they're not boots on the ground in our community. And so there's this odd situation where our dollars which are earmarked for investment in our companies, are being placed with investment groups outside of the state. And I don't see those investment groups actively putting that money to work back in Oregon. And I think that has to be looked at as well.
Well, so we did have one question come up about a tax incentive, something that the state could be doing if companies or people reinvest in Oregon food and beverage companies. So again, is that something that we could look at as a state, something that we need to advocate for?
I think those are essential, and especially on early technology. We built the first biogas plant in North America. It's a high energy biogas facility, and we produce all of our own electricity here. It's different than the biogas plants that handle manure, maybe in a dairy environment. We're putting high energy vegetable waste through this biofacility and creating electricity, organic fertilizer, steam, hot water, hot air, etc. We would have never made that investment in Oregon without federal and state tax credits. And it would have been way too much risk for us, to take that on. So I think when you're trying to bring new technology or incentivize certain types of economies or certain industries to grow and develop, I think those are really, really beneficial to think about, how do those incentives really, really encourage that investment? That's certainly been important in our history. Going back to the financing piece, I think that you said that really well, David. It's that startup phase where we're just, all broke. And it's, once you prove yourself and once you get over the hurdle and over the mountain, then the banks will, flood you with, the opportunity is there, and where you can hurt yourself equally by borrowing too much. But I think it's that startup capital that is that, is the hardest, most precious capital, for the folks we're trying to encourage.
I'd love to hear from Kim on this point, because you've just been through it, Kim, not that long ago.
Yeah. My experience with this was, in the early days at Salt and Straw, I cashed in my 401k and sold my house and maxed out my credit cards and got the company off the ground, to the point where we were able to, qualify for a few SBA loans. And the great part about being able to do that was we were able to open a couple of locations out of the state. And at that point, we were able to get on the radar of a few really great venture capital funds to come in and help us, fund this next wave of growth. And they brought money to the table, which was great. But what they really brought was some incredible expertise to help us craft our strategy and, see around the corner and make sure we were going to fail faster and not go under when we did. So that was really helpful. And, they both were really clear that they really wouldn't be able to be in a position to invest in us if we hadn't proven ourselves out of Portland. And as I learned more about the why behind that, there's Portland's very, it's pretty small, and it's, it just has a different mentality. And so being able to show that, you can hit it big in the big city and it resonates there was a really important step in us being able to qualify for that funding. And, both of our investors are in New York City. So, that's where we find most of those opportunities coming at us from. And they've been great partners that I got to know over a number of years, and really, a good values match, and we appreciate them. But that's kind of what that path looked like for us, and what that journey was like, and what it required of us and the company to get there. I don't know if we're there, but to get where we are now.
And Kim, sorry, go ahead, David.
Just real quickly, Patrick, sorry. I love what Kim said and also what Carla said, which is, the funding question and the early stage funding question, I think it's a two-headed coin. Yes, we need more early stage funding. We know that. And yes, that funding needs to be focused on not just entrepreneurs of privilege. On the other side of the coin, entrepreneurs need to do their work, right? I mean, like what Kim said, with Oregon Chai, we sold everything. Our parents took second mortgages on their homes. We used credit card debt. We, didn't have a car. We did everything we could to bootstrap. And often we see entrepreneurs who want to earn the same salary they were earning at, XYZ company before they left to start their business, and they want a really cool office. And that's just not how it works. You got to be prepared to do the bootstrapping and the hard work. Have 3 different jobs. You're taping boxes during the day, you're doing sampling and demos in the afternoon, and you're doing a production run in the evening. As entrepreneurs, you have to do that work, and then the funding needs to be there for those types of entrepreneurs.
I think, I agree with you, David, but I think that we need to realize in our community that underserved rural communities, BIPOC communities, women have a harder time with access to capital than, white men. And that's something that we need to struggle with, and we need to be intentional about and how we move forward. And so it's just an important thing that we need to discuss and keep at the forefront of our conversations, for sure. But yeah, it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of scary hours when you don't think you're going to make it or make the next payment. And it's, unfortunately not everybody gets there. It's rewarding when you can. So how do we mentor those folks? How do we take those companies from Main Street to traded sector? How do we form that community and get that mentorship in place and provide that value added to the up and coming entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Sam, one thing that I've observed is that this isn't a generalization, of course, but I've found sort of the Oregon entrepreneurs tend to be, they ask for money, seek to raise money too late, and when they do, they're not as well versed as entrepreneurs in some of these other leading markets, and as a result, we have worse concepts getting funded in other markets. And I think getting sort of beyond the downtown, Portland 5 o'clock info session and doing more of that to support entrepreneurs in communities around the state where people can be confident about, building reliable financial systems and how different funding opportunities really work, and just some of that nomenclature will create a lot of confidence to the asks and make more credible asks when they get there.
Yeah, and I'm even, if we talk about mentorship and coming together, I'm even interested in, how do we reach out to people when they're in school, early in school, so grade school, high school, and then in college to help folks start to understand what it looks like and what different paths forward will be. Because if you haven't seen it, it just doesn't exist to you. There's not a path forward to that. So I think we have to start really early.
Absolutely. So as we're talking about and listening to those of you on this panel that have built businesses and those that have, helped others do that, it's really inspiring. And a lot of what we're talking about here is access to markets, access to capital, access to expertise and advice and mentorship. And it occurs to me that when we talk about creating access for entrepreneurs to build the industry overall, that's a place where we all as business leaders can ensure that expansion of access and that investment in access is broadened to include entrepreneurs from those communities that have been, historical marginalized or have been prevented from having that access. And that feels like where the work could be done. For those of you in particular that have started and built businesses, what would be your call to action for, kind of referencing David's point before about entrepreneurs that have rung the bell here or been successful, for those of us leading large businesses in the industry? What's the call to act? I mentioned panelists who have done this work. What do you wish existed? What do you wish folks like all of us were doing back then that we all should be doing now?
I might start by answering that. I spent almost 20 years on the Federal Reserve Board, and one thing I notice about Oregon is when people are at the end of their business career and thinking of selling their business, we see time and time again where those people are moving to Washington or out of state prior to selling that business in the state of Oregon. One call to action is really looking at that policy, because David, you make such a good observation. The entrepreneurs need to pay forward and make those investments. But what we see often, if that business is sold, that capital is incentivized to leave the state. The other part of that I think we need to look at very thoughtfully is our death tax. So it's, most accountants will tell you, you can build your business here, don't die in Oregon. And those two policies, I think, are right at the heart of what David is observing. Is often that successful, wealthy family is really incentivized to move that capital out of state. And if we want that capital for investment, we need to think about how we incentivize keeping it here. I think the other thing is just being supersized clear on the strategic advantage, of land, water, raw material, competitive pricing. We ship containers into Tokyo and Nagoya for 7-8 cents a pound. We ship trucks into New York for 16 cents a pound. So we have to offset, we have to offset that freight with a competitiveness or efficiency or a niche market in some way, because we don't have the population base here in Oregon. 90% of what we produce has to leave the state of Oregon because we just don't have that big population. So it's, there's a list, and it's a pretty simple list of what we all need in terms of, labor, education, rail, competitive ports, truck access. We're working on building an intermodal rail facility in Albany. That food safety piece, Patrick, is critical. I think the regulatory environment, I would circle 3 times. We've got a lot of redundancy in our regulatory environment, and I think we need to kind of step back and really help. It would almost be impossible, I think, today to get through the food safety hurdle as a startup in our business. We wouldn't know enough at 24 and 25 to start the business we now own, nor could we afford the food safety, expertise that it would take for us to pass the SQF audits to be able to supply the customers that we do. So that one would have a very heavy circle. And then, you know, what are we going to do to just really keep our air clean, you know, water, soil clean? We've got some air quality issues associated with these forest fires that many of us are struggling with in agriculture, and, you know, wine grapes. And I think, you know, we need to address that. And then just maintaining a healthy vendor and supply base, competitiveness, keeping that critical mass. So we're really keeping that supply base here as well. That list is pretty basic, but it's pretty essential for encouraging startups.
Absolutely.
I think that supply chain is really important in keeping that healthy and transparent as we move forward as an industry. That consumers is something that we want to see, and also in a way of holding us accountable. You know, I think that we need to hold each other accountable to a lot of these things as well, moving forward. You know, how does the university system or higher ed play a role in this ecosystem? I know, Kim, at least I've heard you developed some flavors with OSU, or maybe you could, you know, enlighten us a little bit on that journey and how that worked, and how
oh my gosh, Salt and Straw, you know, we started at the Food Innovation Center, which I know David has some experience, I think, working with them too. And, you know, that's a partnership with Oregon State University and the Department of Ag. And it's pretty innovative here in the state of Oregon. And we couldn't believe as a startup that we got to walk into these, you know, state-of-the-art facilities, and we could tap into faculty members throughout the development process and any questions that we had. They would connect us. They had food safety, to your point, Carla, experts to help walk us through everything that was needed. I don't know how we would have done it on our own in a commercial kitchen by ourselves somewhere. So it was a tremendous support from the state of Oregon, and I think a really innovative way to create a, you know, self-sustaining cycle. And then we also, you know, we try to stay really close to entrepreneur groups in the various universities, and working with them to mentor and partner with them and give back on projects and internships. So that's another way that we work to stay engaged on that level.
So a couple of things I'd looked at. Firstly, I'm seeing some amazing comments coming through from the attendees. So Patrick and Sam, I'm not sure if maybe we can capture those post-call and have an opportunity to answer them, if that's possible, because there's some really good stuff coming through. You know, one of them that caught my attention is we're talking about Oregon and our food and beverage companies, yet, you know, we have people going without food in our own state. You know, and I think, you know, more now than ever, looking at those hard issues and not sweeping them under the rug is critical. You know, a few things I want to say, and just commenting on, again, Carla and Kim's. So the Food Innovation Lab is an amazing resource. It's an incredible resource for us in this state. Oregon State University is one of the foremost ag colleges in the country. It's right here. Second thing I'll say is, you know, there are folks like Patrick who run very large companies who have done amazing things working with our smaller brands, collaborations. You know, when Stumptown was smaller, you know, partnering with them on an ice cream flavor. Kim has done the same. A woodblock chocolate ice cream with, you know, Salt and Straw, and piggybacking on some of the larger brands that are doing great things to support our earlier stage companies. You have folks like Jess who, you know, are at the forefront of what it is lawyers do to help businesses in these categories and making their legal work accessible to early stage companies. There are a ton of resources in this city, in this state, ranging from growers to co-packers and manufacturers to all of your service providers, tax, legal, to the bigger brands, food innovators. I think it would be cool if someone could compile a list. You know, maybe it's a little 3-ring, you know, or online virtual 3-ring binder that has tabs that is, you know, broken down between suppliers, manufacturers, co-packers, legal, tax and strategy, investment bankers, larger companies that are willing to work with smaller brands, mentors, mentor groups, and then the various funding organizations. because frankly, it feels to me like it's kind of scattered out there. So I'll throw that out as something that I think it would be really cool to have for our emerging growth companies.
Yeah, we've been a part of some conversations to get a little bit organized about which sort of the very supportive groups do what and sort of what's their sweet spot for helping entrepreneurs and high growth middle market companies. And I think you're right. So that way organizations aren't duplicating tasks is important. The other thing culturally, we talked about the culture, creating culture of investment. I also would like to see us do two things. One, create a better culture of celebrating successful exits, because that just means that somebody from another state wants to come in and plunk in, hopefully hundreds of millions of dollars into the state of Oregon that releases wealth that was actually bound up in existing enterprises, and it also tends to. These are largely place-bound companies that are staying in Oregon. If you look at, Kettle Chips, Pacific Foods, Dave's Killer Bread, many others, they're all here and they're still employing people. And then the other cultural shift I'd love to see more of our strong Oregon companies, instead of thinking themselves as targets, thinking of acquisitive strategies of their own. And we tend to be humble here in Oregon, resilient but humble. And there are organizations, including some on this call, who have the horsepower to be acquisitive, and that would be fantastic.
I love that, Jess.
I think one of the comments that came across on, Oregon's hunger is such a thoughtful comment. And, the food processors play a really critical role in giving millions and millions of pounds of food to the Oregon Food Bank every year. And I think there's still more to do. There's much more to do. Our company, Stallbush, our goal is to give 1 million servings every year, but the hunger continues to grow and the demand continues to grow. Senator Wyden had a number of us work on a food security reserve, different than the Oregon Food Bank, but a true reserve to get through something that would be triggered in a year like what we saw this year with COVID, or if we saw a tsunami, or just highly, truly, genuinely unusual events. And I think the framework is there to make that happen. Anyway, I do think we have a responsibility, all of us, to do more and think about those around us, and just the hunger rates that we see every day in our communities. But I would want our viewers to know that food processors often take great leadership and pride in working on that.
I would second David with some great comments coming through, both from the audience and on the panel. And obviously, there is a huge hunger for organizations or times that we can talk like this, and maybe we can use this as a stepping stone to something larger and more consistent within the community. Have an Oregon-wide conversation that could start here today, which would be fantastic.
I love that, Sam. I know we're in a weird time with COVID. It's disorienting. We have an election. There's been fires. There's been race riots. It's a super difficult time. For food and beverage companies, food service is a really important distribution channel, right? Like for us at Oregon Chai, we had retail. So we were in, grocery stores and club and all the places where you can go buy Tillamook. But we also, a big part of our business was coffee shops and restaurants and cafes and hotels, and those aren't really open. And so that's really hurting a lot of our businesses. Not only is that revenue for them, but that's a place where they brand themselves. When you're on a menu board at a restaurant or a coffee shop, it creates awareness about your brand, and then it's more likely someone will put it in their grocery basket when they're in the grocery store. So these are hard times, and it's also a hard time for the state. And, one of the things I want to say, because I think it plays off your comment, Sam, is I think the state of Oregon needs to think about its brand. And, when I moved here 30 years ago, I moved here because Oregon was a really cutting edge progressive state. We had land use planning. We were the first to have the bottle bill. We were doing cool things. And I feel like we've lost that. And Portland still, until maybe recently, had kind of a cool factor, innovation, entrepreneurial, certainly food and beverage buzz to it. But I think we're at risk of losing that as well, to be very honest. And so, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think we have to find a way to get back to being leaders and to putting policy in place that is progressive in the sense that it supports our businesses and our business communities, and it allows people to grow jobs, put people to work, for people to make a good living, and not have them be considered sellouts or, you know, taking the money and run. You know, we can be progressive and be keeping Portland weird, and, you know, not have human feces on the sidewalk as we walk to work. And I think we can talk all we want right now about food innovation and angel investment, but if our state doesn't get it together as it relates to what we stand for and how we are going to be strong and different than our neighbor to the north or our neighbor to the south, then all of our conversations on these micro issues are frankly probably not all that relevant, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, David, for that. And I just, you know, recognizing that we're out of time, I know we could have this conversation for days, and I would enjoy that. Just as we close here, you know, there were so many great comments, suggestions, ideas, definitive things that are already happening that were mentioned in the chat and by all of our panelists here today. And I think we really made the point. We've got these great industry leaders here on this panel, all coming in open-minded, and we see the benefit of the participation of the 100 plus folks that were here, sharing their ideas and their commitment to this idea of growing the industry in the chat here. So I'm excited about the opportunity to use this panel that we had today, which, you know, we captured the chat and the ideas there, using this panel as some kind of a launching pad. I will venture to say for my fellow panelists here and fellow co-moderator that they're also interested in that and committed to that, and that we can come together and don't know what the action exactly coming out of this is, but I know there's a bunch of great ideas that we can kind of distill and to move forward. So I just want to say, as we get a bit over time here, I just want to say thanks to each of the panelists, and thanks to my co-moderator Sam, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks so much to everybody who added to the chat and conversation here.
Likewise. Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for everybody that tuned in, and thanks
everybody.
To the panelists.
Thank you.
Have a great end of the day. Enjoy the fall weather.
Thank you.